The $80,000 luxury sedan sat dead in the parking lot of a struggling neighborhood repair shop. Its owner, a tech billionaire CEO named Brielle Douglas, stood in designer heels, staring at grease-stained walls, and a man in coveralls she would never have noticed. But it wasn't the mechanic who brought her there. It was his 8-year-old daughter, Summer, who had tugged at Brielle's sleeve outside a coffee shop and whispered with absolute certainty, "My dad can fix anything." What happened next shattered everything Brielle thought she knew about success, worth, and what it means to be broken, because the man she dismissed as just another blue-collar worker held a secret that would not only save her crumbling empire, but teach her that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can see us most clearly. This is the story of how one little girl's faith changed 2 lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in Ashwood Heights carried the scent of burnt coffee and desperation. In the heart of the city's financial district, the glass tower of Nexus Digital stood like a monument to ambition, its silver panels reflecting the chaos of rush hour below. Inside the top-floor executive suite, Brielle Douglas stood at her desk, her fingers gripping the edge of mahogany hard enough to leave marks. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, strained and apologetic. "Miss Douglas, the board is waiting. They've been in the conference room for 20 minutes. Brielle's jaw tightened. 20 minutes. 20 minutes of her investors stewing in doubt, whispering about quarterly losses and leadership crises. 20 minutes closer to a vote of no confidence that could strip her of everything she had built. "Tell them I'm on my way," she said. Her voice clipped. She grabbed her leather portfolio, straightened her charcoal blazer, and strode toward the door. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. Control was her currency, and she had spent a decade mastering it. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in Nexus Digital's history, a woman who had clawed her way past skeptics, past men who swore she'd never last, past every voice that told her she wasn't enough. But today, the cracks were showing. The elevator descended in silence, each floor a countdown to judgment. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors, sharp-featured, dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion she refused to acknowledge. She had canceled dinners, skipped sleep, sacrificed friendships, all to keep Nexus Digital from collapsing under the weight of a failed product launch. The doors opened to the parking garage, and Brielle moved toward her car, a sleek black luxury sedan that cost more than most people earned in a year. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street. 3 blocks later, the engine coughed. Her eyes flicked to the dashboard. No warning lights, no alerts, just a sudden, violent shudder that rippled through the frame like a dying breath. "No," she whispered. "Not now." The car lurched forward, sputtering. Brielle's pulse quickened. She pressed the accelerator. Nothing. The steering wheel felt heavy, unresponsive. The sedan coasted forward on momentum alone, drifting toward the curb. And then it died. Silence filled the cabin, oppressive and final. Brielle sat frozen, her hands still gripping the wheel, her mind racing. The board meeting was in 15 minutes. 15 minutes to prove she was still in control, still worthy of their trust. She reached for her phone, dialing her assistant. "Send a car. Now." "Ma'am, traffic is backed up. It'll take at least 30 minutes. 30 minutes. She might as well hand them her resignation. Brielle hung up, her chest tightening. She looked around, trying to orient herself. This wasn't the financial district anymore. She had drifted into Brookside, a neighborhood she had only ever seen from the highway, a place of faded storefronts, cracked sidewalks, and people who didn't belong in her world. And there, half a block away, she saw it, a small auto repair shop, wedged between a laundromat and a corner deli. The sign above the garage door read Ironwood Auto Care in chipped paint, barely legible against the weathered brick. Brielle hesitated. Everything in her screamed to call a tow truck, to wait in the air-conditioned comfort of a rideshare, to avoid stepping into a place that smelled of oil and poverty. But time was a blade at her throat, and she had no choice. She grabbed her portfolio and stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. The morning sun glared down, unforgiving. She approached the shop, her eyes scanning the cluttered interior. Tool racks lined the walls. Engine parts sat scattered across workbenches. A radio played low, some classic rock station crackling through static. And in the center of it all stood a man in grease-stained coveralls, bent over the hood of an old pickup truck. His hands moved with quiet precision, adjusting something she couldn't see. He didn't look up when she entered. "Excuse me," Brielle said, her voice sharp. "I need help." The man straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his ears and a face that carried the kind of weariness only hard work could carve. His eyes, a deep brown, studied her without judgment, without the deference she was used to. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice calm, almost indifferent. "Obviously," Brielle snapped. "It died 3 blocks away. I need it running in the next 10 minutes. He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that might have been amusement. 10 minutes. "Yes, 10 minutes. I have an emergency." He glanced past her toward the Tin Street, then back at her. "What kind of car?" "A Lexus LS 500. Black. Just outside." He nodded slowly, setting down the rag. "I'll take a look." Brielle followed him outside, her heels struggling against the uneven pavement. The man crouched beside her car, popping the hood with practiced ease. He leaned in, his hands tracing wires and hoses with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "When did it start acting up?" he asked. "Just now. No warning. It just died." He hummed, a low sound that suggested he was already diagnosing the problem in his head. Brielle crossed her arms, impatience simmering beneath her skin. She checked her phone. 12 minutes until the board meeting. "Well?" she demanded. "Fuel pump," he said without looking up. "It's shot. Can you fix it?" He straightened, meeting her gaze. "Not in 10 minutes." Her stomach dropped. "How long?" "Couple hours. Maybe 3 if I have to order the part." 3 hours? Her voice rose. Panic, cracking through the veneer of control. "I don't have 3 hours. I don't even have 30 minutes. He shrugged. His expression, unreadable. "Then you've got a problem." Brielle's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, to demand, to remind him who she was. But what good would it do? He didn't know her name, didn't care about her empire. To him, she was just another person with a broken car. "Is there anything you can do?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. The man studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. Pity. Maybe. Or recognition of desperation he had seen before. "I can try a temporary fix," he said finally. "Bypass the pump, get you running long enough to reach wherever you're going, but it won't last." "How long will that take?" 15 minutes. She exhaled sharply. It wasn't enough, but it was something. "Do it," she said. He nodded and turned back to the engine. Brielle stood there, watching him work, her world narrowing to the sound of metal against metal, the smell of gasoline, the rhythm of a stranger's hands saving her from ruin. And in the doorway of the shop, unnoticed by either of them, a small figure watched with wide eyes and a knowing smile. Summer Holt, 8 years old, with wild curls and a gap-toothed grin, clutched a juice box in one hand and whispered to herself, "I told you, my dad can fix anything." 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Brielle stood off to the side, her arms folded tight across her chest, her eyes flicking between the man working under the hood and the phone in her hand. Messages from her assistant flooded the screen, each one more urgent than the last. "Board is getting restless. They're asking where you are. Miss Douglas, please respond." She didn't respond. What could she say? That she was stranded in a neighborhood she'd never noticed, watching a mechanic in coveralls try to resurrect her dead car with nothing but duct tape and willpower. The man worked in silence. His movements efficient, unhurried. He didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. He simply did what needed to be done. And there was something almost hypnotic about the way his hands moved, confident and sure, as though the engine was speaking to him in a language only he understood. Brielle hated how much she needed him in that moment. "Who are you?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look up. "Grayson Foster. And you own this place?" "Yeah." "How long have you been a mechanic?" "Long enough." His answers were clipped, borderline dismissive, and it rankled her. She was used to people bending over backward to impress her, to earn her approval. But Grayson Foster didn't seem to care who she was or what she thought of him. "Do you know who I am?" she pressed. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Should I?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm the CEO of Nexus Digital." "Never heard of it." The words landed like a slap. Brielle felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of indignation and something uncomfortably close to embarrassment. Nexus Digital was worth billions. She had been featured in Forbes, interviewed on national television, lauded as one of the most innovative leaders in tech. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And this man had never heard of it. "We develop AI-driven solutions for enterprise software," she said stiffly, as though explaining would somehow restore her sense of importance. "Sounds complicated," Grayson said, his tone neutral. "It is." He shrugged. "I fix cars, not complicated." Brielle opened her mouth to argue, to point out the sophistication of her work, the complexity of her responsibilities. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the tension. "Daddy, is the fancy lady going to stay for lunch?" Both of them turned. Standing in the doorway of the shop was a little girl, no more than 8 years old, with a tangle of dark curls and bright, curious eyes. She wore a faded purple t-shirt and jeans with grass stains on the knees, and she held a juice box, like it was treasure. Grayson's expression softened immediately, the hard edges melting away. "Summer, I told you to stay inside. I finished my coloring," Summer said, as though that explained everything. She skipped forward, her gaze fixed on Brielle with unfiltered fascination. "You're really pretty. Are you a movie star?" Brielle blinked, caught off guard. "No, I'm not." "Then why are you so dressed up?" "I have an important meeting." Summer tilted her head, considering this. "Is that why your car broke?" "I don't think those two things are related." "Maybe they are," Summer said sagely. "Sometimes things break when you need them to slow down." Brielle stared at the girl, unsure how to respond. There was something disarming about her, something that made it impossible to maintain the walls Brielle usually kept so firmly in place. Grayson cleared his throat. "Summer, let the lady breathe. She's in a hurry." "But you're fixing it, right?" Summer asked, looking up at her father with absolute certainty. "Trying to." "You will," Summer said simply. "You always do." The confidence in her voice was startling. Brielle watched as Summer turned back to her, her small face earnest and open. "My dad can fix anything," Summer said. "One time, Mrs. Lila's stove broke, and everyone said she'd have to buy a new one. But Daddy fixed it with a paperclip and some wire. And Mr. Ashton's truck wouldn't start for 3 months, and Daddy got it running in one afternoon." Grayson's jaw tightened slightly. "Summer, that's enough." But Summer wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Brielle, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's really good at fixing broken things. Not just cars, people too." Brielle's chest tightened unexpectedly. She looked down at this little girl, who spoke with such unshakable faith, and something inside her cracked just a little. "Is that so?" Brielle asked softly. Summer nodded. "Yup. He fixed me when I was sad about mommy leaving. He said broken doesn't mean gone forever. It just means you need someone who knows how to put the pieces back together. The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Brielle's throat felt tight. She glanced at Grayson, who had gone very still, his hands pausing over the engine. "Summer," he said quietly, his voice firm but not unkind. "Go back inside." "But, now," Summer pouted but obeyed, skipping back toward the shop. Before she disappeared through the door, she turned and waved at Brielle. "Bye, fancy lady. I hope your meeting goes good." And then she was gone. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Brielle didn't know what to say. She had come here expecting a quick fix, a transaction, nothing more. But now, she stood in the shadow of a man who worked with his hands and raised his daughter alone, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Small. Grayson broke the silence first. "She talks too much." "She's sweet," Brielle said, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. "She's 8. Grayson replied. As though that explained everything. He bent back over the engine, his hands resuming their work. "Almost done." Brielle watched him, her mind racing. Who was this man? How had he ended up here, in this tiny shop, raising a daughter who believed he could fix anything? And why did his calm, his quiet confidence, unsettle her so much? "There," Grayson said finally, straightening. He closed the hood with a dull thud. "That should get you where you need to go. But like I said, it's temporary. You'll need a real repair soon." Brielle nodded, pulling out her wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Grayson wiped his hands on his rag, his expression unreadable. "Nothing." She blinked. "What? You don't owe me anything. I can't just—" "You can," he said simply. "And you will. You've got a meeting to get to." Brielle stared at him, her pride warring with gratitude. She wasn't used to charity, wasn't used to people helping her without expecting something in return. "Thank you," she said finally, the words awkward on her tongue. Grayson nodded once. "Drive safe." She turned toward her car, then hesitated. "Your daughter," she said, not looking back. "She really believes in you." "I know," Grayson said quietly. "That's why I can't let her down." Brielle slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and felt relief flood through her. As it roared to life, she glanced once more at the shop, at the man standing in the doorway with grease on his hands and shadows in his eyes. And as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Summer's words had been meant for more than just cars. He's really good at fixing broken things. Not just cars, people too. Brielle made it to the board meeting with 3 minutes to spare. She swept into the conference room, her heels clicking against polished marble, her face a mask of composure. The 12 board members sat around the long table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. At the head of the table, Elijah Douglas, the company's largest shareholder and Brielle's most vocal critic, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made her stomach turn. "Nice of you to join us, Miss Douglas," Elijah said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "My apologies," Brielle said smoothly, taking her seat. "Unexpected complications." "Complications seem to be your specialty lately," Elijah replied. The room chuckled, a low ripple of agreement that felt like daggers. Brielle straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Shall we begin?" she asked. The next 2 hours were brutal. Every decision she had made over the past quarter was dissected, criticized, questioned. The failed product launch, the missed revenue targets, the loss of a major client, all of it laid bare like an autopsy of her leadership. Elijah led the charge, his questions designed not to answers but to humiliate. "Tell me, Miss Douglas," he said at one point, his tone mocking. "Do you actually believe you're the right person to lead this company? Or are you simply too stubborn to admit you're in over your head?" Brielle's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. I believe that leadership isn't measured by perfection, but by the ability to adapt and persevere. Adapt? Elijah laughed. You've driven us into the ground. I've kept us afloat through a market downturn that buried half our competitors. Barely, he shot back. And at what cost? Morale is at an all-time low. Our best engineers are leaving. Investors are losing faith. You're not adapting, Brielle. You're drowning. The room fell silent. Brielle felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in their eyes. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to remind them that she had built this company from nothing. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with exhaustion and doubt. The meeting ended without vote, but the message was clear. Her time was running out. Brielle returned to her office and closed the door behind her. She sank into her chair, her hands trembling. For the first time in years, she felt the cracks in her armor widen, threatening to swallow her whole. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Your car is making a strange noise. Should I call a mechanic? Brielle closed her eyes, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Of course. Grayson's temporary fix was already failing. She grabbed her keys and headed back to the parking garage. The drive to Brookside was longer this time. The afternoon traffic thick and unforgiving. By the time she pulled up to Ironwood Auto Care, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. Grayson was outside, washing his hands in a bucket of soapy water. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. Back already? He asked. It's making a noise, Brielle said, her voice clipped. He dried, his hands on a rag, and walked over to her car. Pop the hood. She did. He leaned in, listened, then straightened with a sigh. Like I said, it's temporary. You need a new fuel pump. How long will that take? I can have it done by tomorrow afternoon. Maybe sooner. If the part comes in early. Brielle's shoulders sagged. I don't have time for this. Then you'll keep breaking down. Grayson said simply. Your choice. She wanted to argue, to demand a faster solution. But she knew he was right. She was trapped, dependent on a man she barely knew to keep her life from falling apart. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. Grayson nodded. Leave the car. I'll call you when it's ready. Brielle hesitated. Leaving her car here felt like surrendering control, like admitting she couldn't handle her own problems. But what choice did she have? Okay, she said finally. As she turned to leave, Summer appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up. You came back, Summer exclaimed, running over. I knew. You would. Brielle managed a faint smile. I didn't have much choice. My car's still broken. That's okay, Summer said brightly. Daddy will fix it for real this time. He always does. Brielle glanced at Grayson, who was already walking back toward the shop. There was something about the way he moved, the quiet confidence in his posture, that both comforted and unsettled her. Your dad doesn't say much, does he? Brielle asked. Summer giggled. Nope, but he listens really good, and he remembers everything. Like, one time I told him I wanted a tree house, and he didn't say anything, but then one day I woke up and there it was in the backyard. He built it all by himself. Brielle's chest tightened. She tried to imagine someone in her life who listened like that, who cared enough to build something just because she had wished for it. The image refused to form. You're lucky, Brielle said softly. Summer tilted her head. You think so? I know so. Summer studied her for a moment, her young face suddenly serious. Are you sad? The question caught Brielle off guard. She opened her mouth to deny it, to brush it off with some polished response. But looking into Summer's earnest eyes, she found she couldn't lie. A little, Brielle admitted. Summer nodded sagely. Daddy says it's okay to be sad sometimes. It just means you're still trying. Brielle's throat tightened. She blinked hard, willing herself not to cry in front of this little girl who saw too much. Your dad sounds like a smart man, Brielle said. He is, Summer agreed. Then she grinned. But don't tell him I said that. He'll get all embarrassed. Despite everything, Brielle laughed. It was a small sound, fragile and unexpected, but it felt like the first real breath she'd taken all day. "Do you need a ride?" Summer asked suddenly. "We have Daddy's truck. It's old, but it works." "I can call a car," Brielle said. "But that's boring," Summer insisted. "Come on, I'll show you Daddy's radio. It only plays old people music, but some of it's pretty good." Before Brielle could protest, Summer grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the shop, and for reasons she couldn't explain, Brielle let herself be led. Inside, Grayson looked up from the workbench, surprise flickering across his face. "She needs a ride," Summer announced. "Can we take her?" Grayson's eyes met Brielle's, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We can do that." And as Brielle climbed into the passenger seat of a beat-up truck that smelled like motor oil and pine air freshener, with an 8-year-old chattering happily in the back seat, she realized something that terrified her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The ride to Brielle's office building was quiet at first, save for Summer's cheerful humming from the back seat. The old truck rattled over potholes, its suspension groaning with age, but it ran smoothly enough. Grayson drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his expression unreadable. Brielle sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her leather portfolio balanced on her lap, acutely aware of how out of place she looked. Her designer blazer and silk blouse felt ridiculous in a truck held together by determination and duct tape. She caught sight of a child's drawing taped to the dashboard, a stick figure with wild hair holding a wrench, surrounded by hearts. "Daddy at work," Summer explained from the back seat, noticing where Brielle was looking. "I made it for his birthday." Brielle's lips curved into a faint smile. "It's lovely. He says it's his favorite thing in the whole truck," Summer said proudly. Grayson cleared his throat, a hint of color rising to his cheeks. "Summer. What?" "It's true." Brielle glanced at him, studying his profile. There was something about the way he held himself, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. It reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. A memory just out of reach. "How long have you owned the shop?" she asked, breaking the silence. "About 6 years," Grayson said. "Did you always want to be a mechanic?" His jaw tightened slightly. "No." The single word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Brielle waited, sensing there was more, but Grayson didn't elaborate. Summer, however, had no such reservations. "Daddy used to do something else," Summer piped up. "Something really important. But he doesn't talk about it much." "Summer," Grayson said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "What?" "It's not a secret. Grandma says you were a hero." Brielle's curiosity sharpened. "A hero?" Grayson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "My mother exaggerates." "She does not," Summer protested. "She showed me your medals. They're in a box in the attic." Medals. The word sparked something in Brielle's mind. She turned to face Grayson more fully. "What did you do before the shop?" "Nothing that matters now," he said flatly. But it did matter. Brielle could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his eyes refused to meet hers. Whatever he had done before, whatever he had been, it was something he had buried deliberately, something he didn't want examined. They pulled up in front of the Nexus digital tower, its glass facade reflecting the dying sunlight. Brielle reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride, and for fixing my car." Grayson nodded. "I'll call you tomorrow when it's ready." She climbed out, but before she could close the door, Summer leaned forward. "Miss Brielle?" "Yes?" "You should come back and visit us," Summer said earnestly. "Not just for your car. Just to visit. Daddy doesn't have a lot of friends. And I think you could use one too." Brielle's throat tightened. The honesty in Summer's voice, the simple kindness of the invitation, struck something deep inside her. She managed to smile. "I'd like that," she said softly. Summer beamed. Promise? Promise. As the truck pulled away, Brielle stood on the sidewalk, watching it disappear into traffic. She felt strangely unmoored, as though the ground beneath her had shifted in some fundamental way. Back in her office, she tried to focus on work. Emails piled up, reports needed reviewing, but her mind kept drifting back to Grayson Foster and his daughter, to the way Summer spoke about her father with such absolute faith, to the shadows in Grayson's eyes when the past was mentioned. On impulse, she opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. The results were sparse. A business license for Ironwood Auto Care. A few mentions in local community forums, neighbors praising his work, his fairness, his willingness to help those who couldn't afford to pay, but nothing about his life before the shop. Nothing about medals or heroism or whatever it was he had left behind. She tried different search terms, adding variations. And then, buried in the third page of results, she found it. A newspaper article from 7 years ago. Its headline faded, but still legible. Local. Engineer saves manufacturing plant from catastrophic failure. Brielle clicked on the link. The article loaded slowly, its text dense and technical. But as she read, her pulse quickened. 7 years ago, a manufacturing facility in the industrial district had faced a crisis. A critical system failure in the plant's cooling infrastructure had threatened to cause a meltdown that would have destroyed the facility and endangered hundreds of workers. The company's own engineers had declared it unfixable, recommending immediate evacuation and shutdown. But one man had disagreed. Grayson Foster, then a senior mechanical engineer at Titan Industrial Solutions, had volunteered to attempt a repair. Working alone, with minimal equipment and a ticking clock, he had jury-rigged a solution using spare parts and improvised tools. The article described it as a miracle of engineering intuition, a repair so unorthodox that it shouldn't have worked, but did. He had saved the plant, saved hundreds of jobs, been hailed as a hero, and then, less than 6 months later, he had disappeared from the industry entirely. Brielle sat back, her mind racing. What had happened? Why would someone with that kind of talent, that kind of recognition, walk away to run a small auto shop in Brookside? She dug deeper, searching for more information. But the trail went cold. No more articles, no more mentions. It was as though Grayson Foster had been erased from the professional world. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Grayson. Your car will be ready by noon tomorrow. Parts came in early. Brielle stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to ask him about the article, about what had happened, about why he had walked away from everything. But something held her back. Whatever his reasons, they were his to share or keep. Instead, she typed, "Thank you, I'll pick it up tomorrow." His reply came quickly. "Summer says to bring cookies." Despite everything, Brielle smiled. The next morning, she arrived at Ironwood Auto Care just before noon, a box of expensive bakery cookies balanced in one hand. The shop was busy, 2 other cars parked in the lot, their owners chatting with Grayson as he worked. He looked up as she approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Right on time," he said. "I'm always on time," Brielle replied. Summer came running out from inside the shop, her face lighting up when she saw the cookie box. "You brought them. Daddy said you would, but I wasn't sure." "I keep my promises," Brielle said, handing her the box. Summer opened it immediately, her eyes widening. "These look fancy." "They're from a bakery downtown," Brielle said. "They're too pretty to eat," Summer breathed. Then she grinned. "But I'm gonna eat them anyway." Grayson shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "What do you say, Summer?" "Thank you, Miss Brielle." "You're welcome." Grayson led Brielle to her car, now parked near the garage bay. "New fuel, pump, new filters, and I checked the rest of the system while I was at it. She should run smooth for a long time." Brielle nodded, pulling out her wallet. "How much do I owe you?" He named a price that seemed absurdly low for the work he had described. Brielle frowned. That can't be right. It's right. You replaced the fuel pump. The filters. Checked the entire system. That's worth at least 3 times what you're asking. Grayson shrugged. I don't overcharge. You're undercharging. Maybe. He met her gaze. His expression calm. But I'd rather sleep well than get rich. The words landed harder than they should have. Brielle thought of her own sleepless nights, her empire built on ruthless efficiency and calculated risk. When was the last time she had slept well? When was the last time she had valued peace over profit? She handed him her credit card without further argument. As he ran the payment, she found herself asking the question that had burned in her mind since last night. I read an article, she said carefully, about a manufacturing plant. 7 years ago. Grayson's hand stilled over the card reader. His jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. You saved that plant. Saved hundreds of jobs. Why did you leave engineering? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost resigned. Because I learned that saving things isn't always enough. Sometimes, the people you save turn on you anyway. What do you mean? He handed her card back, his expression closed off. It doesn't matter. It does to me. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or betrayal. I was good at my job, Miss Douglas. Too good. I made people uncomfortable. When you can see problems others can't, when you fix things they've given up on, it makes them feel small. So they found a way to get rid of me. They fired you? They buried me, he said simply. Made it so no one in the industry would hire me. Spread rumors. Destroyed my reputation. By the time they were done, I couldn't get a job changing oil at a chain garage. Brielle's chest tightened. That's not right. No, Grayson agreed. But it's the world we live in. He gestured toward the shop. So I built this. It's small, and it's not glamorous, but it's mine, and no one can take it from me. The vulnerability in his voice shook her. This wasn't the confident mechanic who had fixed her car. This was a man who had been broken by the same kind of corporate machinery she had spent her life navigating. I'm sorry, she said. The words inadequate, but sincere. He nodded. Your car's ready. Drive safe. She wanted to say more, to tell him she understood, that she saw him, that what had been done to him was wrong. But the words tangled in her throat, heavy with her own guilt. How many people had she dismissed in her climb to the top? How many voices had she silenced because they made her uncomfortable? She got into her car, the engine purring to life, with a smoothness it hadn't had in months. As she pulled away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Grayson stood in the doorway of his shop, Summer beside him, waving enthusiastically. And Brielle realized something that terrified her. She didn't want to leave. For the first time in her carefully constructed life, she wanted to stay in a place where people valued kindness over status, where a little girl's faith mattered more than a boardroom vote. But she couldn't. Not yet. Her empire was crumbling, and she had to hold it together, even if it meant returning to a world that suddenly felt emptier than ever. Brielle's car ran perfectly, but her life continued to fall apart. Over the next week, the situation at Nexus Digital deteriorated rapidly. Another key client pulled their contract, citing concerns about the company's direction. 2 senior engineers resigned, lured away by competitors with promises of stability. And Elijah Douglas circulated a memo calling for an emergency board vote on her leadership. She worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and sheer willpower. But no matter how hard she fought, the ground kept shifting beneath her feet. Every solution spawned new problems. Every victory was Pyrrhic. Late one night, alone in her office, she found herself staring at her phone. Grayson's number was still saved in her contacts. On impulse, she scrolled through her photo gallery and found a picture she had taken during her last visit to the shop. Summer grinning beside her father's truck, holding up a wrench like a trophy. The image blurred as tears filled her eyes. When had she become so isolated? When had success become synonymous with loneliness? Her phone rang, startling her. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Miss Brielle?" Summer's voice, small and worried. "It's me, Summer." Brielle straightened immediately. "Summer, what's wrong? How did you get my number?" "From Daddy's phone. He doesn't know I'm calling." Summer's voice dropped to a whisper. "I need your help." Brielle's heart clenched. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm okay, but Daddy's not. He's sick, and he won't go to the doctor. He says we can't afford it, but he can barely stand up, and he's still trying to work, and I'm scared." The fear in Summer's voice cut through Brielle like a blade. "Where are you?" "At the shop. We live in the apartment upstairs." "I'm coming," Brielle said, already grabbing her keys. "Stay with your dad. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She drove through the empty streets, her hands gripping the wheel tight. The city looked different at night, harsher, all sharp angles and shadows. By the time she reached Brookside, her pulse was racing. The shop was dark, but she could see a faint light in the window above. She climbed the exterior staircase, her heels echoing in the silence, and knocked softly on the door. Summer answered immediately, her eyes red-rimmed. "You came." "Of course I came." Brielle stepped inside, taking in the small apartment. It was clean but sparse, furnished with mismatched pieces that looked salvaged or second-hand. A couch with worn cushions, a kitchen table with uneven legs, children's drawings taped to every wall, and on the couch, covered with a thin blanket, lay Grayson. He was pale, his face slick with sweat, his breathing shallow. When he heard her voice, his eyes opened, struggling to focus. "Brielle," his voice was hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "Summer called me," she said, crossing to him. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead and swore softly. "You're burning up. How long have you been like this?" "Couple days," he mumbled. "It's just a flu. I'll be fine." "You're not fine." She turned to Summer. "Does he have a thermometer?" Summer nodded and ran to get it. Brielle knelt beside the couch, her heart pounding. Up close, Grayson looked worse. His lips were cracked, his eyes glassy. This wasn't just a flu. Summer returned with an old-fashioned thermometer. Brielle took his temperature, her stomach dropping when she saw the reading. 103.7. "We're going to the hospital," she said firmly. "No." Grayson tried to sit up and failed. "Can't afford it." "I don't care." "I do." His eyes met hers. Stubborn, even through the fever. "I can't take charity." "This isn't charity, you stubborn man. This is common sense. You have a fever over 103. You need medical attention." "I'll be fine. Will you?" Brielle's voice cracked. "What happens to Summer if you're not? What happens to her if you die? Because you're too proud to accept help." The words hung in the air. Brutal and true. Grayson's face crumpled, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of death, but fear of failing his daughter. "She doesn't have anyone else," he whispered. "Her mother left when she was 3. My parents are gone. If something happens to me, Summer goes into the system." Brielle's throat tightened. She looked at Summer, standing small and scared in the doorway, and something inside her broke. This little girl, who believed her father could fix anything, who drew pictures and made promises and loved with her whole heart. She didn't deserve to lose the one person who loved her back. "Then we make sure nothing happens to you," Brielle said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "And you're going to the hospital if I have to carry you myself." Grayson laughed weakly, then winced. "You couldn't carry me if you tried." "Then I'll call an ambulance." "Brielle." "No." She stood, her hands on her hips. "You fixed my car twice. You drove me when I needed help. You didn't ask for anything in return, so now, it's my turn, let me help you." He stared at her for a long moment, his defenses crumbling. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." The next few hours blurred together. The ambulance ride, Summer clutching Brielle's hand in the back, the emergency room, harsh lights and antiseptic smells. The diagnosis, pneumonia, severe but treatable with antibiotics and rest. They admitted him overnight for observation. Summer refused to leave his side, curling up in the chair beside his bed. Brielle stayed too, though she couldn't have explained why. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching Summer sleep, watching Grayson breathe, and feeling something shift inside her. This man had nothing by society's standards. No wealth, no status, no safety net. And yet he had built a life of such richness. He had his daughter's love. He had the respect of his community. He had purpose. What did she have? An empire on the verge of collapse. A penthouse that echoed with emptiness. A calendar full of meetings with people who would abandon her the moment she showed weakness. She thought of her own father, a corporate executive who had been too busy climbing ladders to notice when his daughter needed him, who had missed recitals and birthdays and quiet moments because there was always another deal, another promotion, another rung to reach. He had died of a heart attack at 53, surrounded by employees who barely knew him. Was that her future? Dying alone in an office, mourned by no one who truly knew her. Around 3 in the morning, Grayson stirred. His eyes opened, clearer now, the fever broken by medication. He saw her sitting there, and frowned. "You're still here," he murmured. "Someone had to be. You didn't have to." "I know." She met his gaze. "I wanted to." He studied her for a long moment. "Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex, tangled with emotions she hadn't let herself feel in years. "Because Summer called, and she was scared. Because you would have done the same for anyone who needed help. Because I'm tired of living in a world where we only help people when there's something in it for us." Grayson's expression softened. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone colder. Someone who wouldn't care about a mechanic and his daughter." Brielle's chest tightened. "I didn't care. Not at first. But Summer, she sees people, really sees them. And when she looks at me, I want to be the person she thinks I am. She has that effect on people," Grayson said quietly. He glanced at his daughter, still sleeping in the chair, her hair falling across her face. "She's the reason I keep going. Every time I think about giving up, about letting the bitterness win, I look at her and remember why I'm here." "She loves you," Brielle said softly. "More than anything." "I know." His voice cracked. "That's what terrifies me. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't protect her from everything I couldn't protect myself from?" Brielle leaned forward. "You don't have to protect her from everything. You just have to show her that even when things break, even when life knocks you down, you get back up. And you've already done that. Every single day." Grayson closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being here, for calling the ambulance, for caring." "Thank you," Brielle replied, her own voice thick with emotion, "for reminding me what matters." They sat in silence after that, the beeping of monitors filling the space between words. And Brielle realized that somewhere in the past week, these two people, a mechanic and his daughter, had become more important to her than any board meeting, any quarterly report, any empire. They had become the thing she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. A reason to be better. By morning, Grayson was stable enough to be discharged with a prescription for antibiotics and strict orders to rest. Brielle drove them home, Summer chattering happily in the back seat about how brave her daddy had been, how the nurses had said he was their favorite patient. Grayson was quiet, exhausted, but when they pulled up to the shop, he turned to Brielle. "I owe you." "You don't owe me anything." "I do. Let me pay you back somehow." Brielle opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. An idea was forming, risky and possibly foolish, but it wouldn't let go. Actually, there might be something. His eyebrows rose. Name it. Come to Nexus Digital tomorrow. I want you to look at something. Look at what? A problem I can't solve. She met his gaze. I've got engineers with advanced degrees, teams of specialists, and none of them can figure it out. But you see things differently, and I think that's exactly what I need. Grayson frowned. I'm not an engineer anymore, Brielle. That life is behind me. Maybe it doesn't have to be. You don't understand what happened, why I left. Then tell me. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. The plant I saved, the company thanked me publicly, gave me awards, called me a hero. But behind closed doors, they hated that I had made them look incompetent. Their own engineers couldn't fix it, but I could. So they started looking for ways to discredit me. What did they do? They accused me of cutting corners, of using unsafe methods, said my repair was reckless, that I had endangered lives instead of saving them. It was all lies, but it didn't matter. The story spread. Other companies wouldn't touch me. I became a liability. Brielle's hands clenched. That's not right. No, but it's what happens when you make powerful people feel small. He looked at her, his eyes haunted. I can't go back to that world, Brielle. I can't risk losing everything I've built here. What if you didn't have to? She leaned forward. What if you could do it on your terms? No one has to know your history. You come in as a consultant, look at the problem, give me your assessment, that's all. And if someone recognizes me, then I'll handle it. Her voice was firm. I promise. Grayson studied her, weighing the risk. Summer leaned between the front seats. You should do it, Daddy. You're really good at solving problems. Summer. And Miss Brielle needs help. You always say we should help people when they need it. Grayson's resistance wavered. He looked at his daughter, then at Brielle, and she could see the war in his eyes. The fear of being hurt again versus the desire to use his gifts to prove that he still mattered. One day, he said finally, I'll look at your problem, but that's all. I'm not coming back to corporate engineering. One day, Brielle agreed, relief flooding through her. That's all I'm asking. The next afternoon, Grayson arrived at Nexus Digital wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Summer had wanted to come too, but Grayson had left her with a neighbor, promising they'd get ice cream afterward. Brielle met him in the lobby, her professional armor back in place, but when she saw him standing there, looking up at the glass tower with something like dread, her heart ached. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Let's just get this over with, he replied. She led him to the research and development floor, where her team had been wrestling with a critical problem for months. The server infrastructure for their new AI platform kept overheating, causing system failures that had delayed the launch indefinitely. Millions of dollars hung in the balance, and her engineers were out of ideas. Grayson followed her into the server room, his eyes immediately scanning the setup. Brielle watched as his posture changed, as something shifted in him. His shoulders straightened, his gaze sharpened. This was the engineer he used to be. Before the world had tried to break him, he walked along the server racks, his fingers trailing over cables, his head tilted as if listening. The head engineer, a man named Ashton Walsh, watched with barely concealed skepticism. Who's this? Ashton asked Brielle. A consultant. We don't need another consultant. We've had 5 teams look at this. Then one more won't hurt, Brielle said, her tone brooking no argument. Grayson ignored the exchange, focused entirely on the servers. He crouched, examining the cooling system, stood on a chair to check the ventilation, asked for a thermal scanner, and spent 10 minutes mapping heat distributions. Finally, he turned to Brielle. Your problem isn't the servers, Ashton scoffed. Of course it's the servers, they're overheating. The servers are overheating, Grayson agreed, because your ventilation design is backwards. You're pulling hot air from the top and pushing it to the sides. but it's recirculating instead of exhausting. Heat builds up in pockets, creating localized failures. The room fell silent. Ashton's face flushed. That's impossible. We followed industry standard protocols. Industry standard doesn't account for this building's unique airflow patterns. Grayson pointed to the ceiling. This floor has a central HVAC system that creates a pressure differential. Your ventilation is fighting it instead of working with it. How could you possibly know that? Ashton demanded. Because I can feel it. Grayson gestured to the room. Stand here long enough. You notice the air moves wrong. It's subtle, but it's there. Brielle's pulse quickened. Can you fix it? Redirect the exhaust vents. Add baffles to channel the airflow. Adjust the fan speeds to compensate for the pressure differential. It's not complicated, just unconventional. Ashton shook his head. This is ridiculous. We're not redesigning our entire system based on the gut feeling of some... He stopped himself, but the word hung unspoken. Nobody. Grayson's expression didn't change, but Brielle saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. This was what he had run from. The dismissal. The contempt. Do it. Brielle said firmly. Miss Douglas, with all due respect. Do it, she repeated, her voice steel. Implement his recommendations. If they don't work, it's on me. Ashton opened his mouth to protest again, but the look in Brielle's eyes stopped him. He nodded stiffly. Fine, but when this fails, I want it on record that I objected. As he walked away, Brielle turned to Grayson. His face was carefully blank, but his hands were shaking slightly. I shouldn't have come, he said quietly. Yes, you should have. She stepped closer. You just solved a problem that's been costing us millions. Ashton's just angry that you saw what he couldn't. That's how it always starts, Grayson said. Someone's pride gets hurt, and suddenly I'm the enemy. Before Brielle could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Elijah Douglas is here, says it's urgent. Her stomach dropped. Elijah never showed up unannounced unless he was making a power play. I have to deal with something, she told Grayson. Can you wait here? He nodded, though his expression was wary. Brielle found Elijah in her office, sitting in her chair as if he owned it. His expression was smug, predatory. Elijah, to what do I owe this surprise? I heard you brought in an outside consultant, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Some nobody, from a repair shop in Brookside. Brielle's blood ran cold. How did he know already? I'm exploring all options to solve our infrastructure problems, she said evenly. Interesting. Elijah stood, circling her desk like a shark. Because I did some digging on your consultant, Grayson Foster. Former engineer at Titan Industrial, disgraced, discredited, thrown out of the industry for reckless practices. Those accusations were false. Were they? Elijah's smile widened. Because I spoke to some people who worked with him. They told me he was dangerous, that he took shortcuts, ignored safety protocols, put people at risk. And now, you've brought him into our facility, given him access to our systems. He's helping us. He's a liability. Elijah leaned forward. And so are you. The board meets in 3 days to vote on your leadership. Bringing in a discredited engineer? That's not going to help your case. Brielle's hands curled into fists. You did this. You're the one who spread those lies about him, aren't you? Elijah's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. 7 years ago, you were on the board at Titan Industrial. You orchestrated his downfall because he made you look incompetent. Careful, Brielle. Accusations like that could be considered slander. It's only slander if it's not true. They stood locked in silent battle, the air crackling with tension. Finally, Elijah straightened his tie. The vote is in 3 days, he said. I suggest you prepare accordingly, and get rid of your consultant before he drags you down with him. He walked out, leaving Brielle shaking with rage and fear. She returned to the server room to find Grayson standing exactly where she had left him, looking more lost than she had ever seen him. I need to go, he said. Grayson, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have come here. Please don't leave. She caught his arm. Not like this. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw years of pain, of betrayal, of being told he wasn't good enough. I can't fight this battle again, Brielle. I don't have it in me. Then let me fight it, she said fiercely. Let me be the one who stands up for you. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Because you're right, she said, her voice breaking. Because you see things no one else can. Because your daughter believes in you, and she's right to. And because I'm tired of living in a world where people like Elijah win. Grayson stared at her, and for a moment, she thought he might stay. But then he pulled his arm free. I'm sorry, he whispered. But some battles can't be won. And he walked away, leaving Brielle standing alone in the cold server room, wondering if she had just lost the only person who could save her company, and the only person who had made her feel human again. Brielle didn't sleep that night. She sat in her penthouse, staring at her laptop screen, reading everything she could find about what had happened to Grayson 7 years ago. The more she read, the clearer the picture became. Elijah had been on Titan Industrial's board when Grayson saved the plant, and in the months that followed, Elijah had systematically destroyed him. By morning, she had made her decision. She called an emergency meeting with her senior team, including Ashton Walsh. When they gathered in the conference room, she stood at the head of the table with a determination that silenced all questions. Yesterday, Grayson Foster identified the root cause of our server failures. She began. Ashton, I want you to implement his recommendations immediately. Ashton shifted uncomfortably. Miss Douglas, I really think we should get a second opinion. We've had 5 second opinions. None of them worked. Her voice was steel. His will. How can you be so sure? Because I did my research. Brielle pulled up a document on the screen behind her. 7 years ago, Grayson Foster prevented a braid hand catastrophic failure at a manufacturing facility. His solution was called impossible by every expert consulted. But it worked, and it's still working today. The room went quiet. Ashton's face paled. I also discovered that his reputation was destroyed not because he was reckless, but because he made powerful people uncomfortable. She looked directly at Ashton. People who couldn't accept that someone without their credentials could see solutions they missed. Miss Douglas, implement his recommendations, she said firmly. That's not a request. Ashton nodded stiffly and left. The rest of the team followed, leaving Brielle alone with Rhiann Vaughn, her VP of Operations. That was brave, Rhiann said quietly. It was necessary. Elijah's going to use this against you at the board meeting. Let him try. Brielle's jaw set. I'm done playing by rules designed to keep people like Grayson out and people like Elijah in power. That afternoon, Brielle drove to Brookside. She found the Prubel. Shop closed, a handwritten sign on the door. Closed due to illness. Reopen Monday. She climbed the stairs to the apartment above and knocked. Summer answered, her face brightening. Miss Brielle, did you come to see Daddy? I did. Is he here? Summer's expression fell slightly. He's in his room. He's been sad since yesterday. Brielle's heart clenched. Can I talk to him? Summer nodded and led her through the small apartment. She knocked on a bedroom door. Daddy? Miss Brielle is here. There was a long pause, then Grayson's voice, rough with exhaustion. Tell her I'm resting. She looks really sad too, Summer called back. Another pause. Then, let her in. Summer opened the door and skipped away, leaving Brielle standing in the doorway. Grayson sat on the edge of his bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled. He looked up at her with eyes that held defeat. You shouldn't be here, he said. Probably not. She stepped inside. But I needed to tell you something. Brielle, your solution worked. The words came out in a rush. We implemented your recommendations this morning. The server stabilized immediately. Heat distribution dropped by 40%. The system is running better than it has in months. Grayson's expression didn't change. That's good. That's more than good. That's proof that you were right. That you're brilliant. That everything they said about you 7 years ago was a lie. It doesn't matter, he said quietly. Lies travel faster than truth. They always have. Brielle crossed the room and knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then we make the truth louder. Grayson, I have a board meeting in 2 days. Elijah is going to try to remove me as CEO. But if I go in there with proof that your solution saved our launch, with documentation showing what you really did 7 years ago, I can fight back. You'll lose your company defending me. I'll lose my soul if I don't. Her voice cracked. These past few days, watching you with Summer, seeing how you help your community, how you fix things, not for money, but because it's right. You've reminded me why I started Nexus Digital in the first place. It wasn't about wealth or power. It was about building something that mattered. Grayson's jaw tightened. What are you asking me? Come to the board meeting. Stand with me. Let me tell them the truth about what happened to you, about what you've done for us. Help me prove that the system that destroyed you was wrong. And if they destroy you too? Brielle smiled sadly. Then at least I'll know I fought for something real. The morning of the board meeting arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with the threat of snow. Brielle stood in her office, dressed in her sharpest suit, her armor for battle. But unlike every other fight she had faced, this time she wasn't alone. Grayson arrived with Summer, who wore her best dress, and clutched her father's hand tightly. Brielle had tried to convince him to leave Summer with a neighbor, but he had refused. If I'm going to fight, she needs to see it, he had said. She needs to know that standing up for yourself matters, even when you're scared. Now, as they rode the elevator to the top floor, Summer squeezed between them and took Brielle's hand too. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, Brielle admitted. Daddy says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are. Brielle looked at Grayson, whose eyes were fixed on the climbing floor numbers. Your dad is a wise man. I know, Summer said proudly. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the executive suite. Brielle's assistant looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of Grayson and Summer. Miss Douglas, the board is already inside. Good. Brielle straightened her shoulders. Let's not keep them waiting. The conference room fell silent when she entered with Grayson and Summer. 12 board members sat. Around the table, Elijah at the far end, his expression smug. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Grayson. Miss Douglas, this is a closed board meeting. Guests aren't permitted. Mr. Foster isn't a guest. He's here to present findings related to our infrastructure crisis. Brielle's voice was steady, commanding, and I'd ask that we extend him the courtesy of listening. Elijah's smile thinned. This is highly irregular. So is calling a vote to remove a sitting CEO without cause. Brielle shot back. But here we are. Tension crackled through the room. One of the older board members, Edith Walsh, spoke up. Let's hear what Mr. Foster has to say. Then we'll proceed with the scheduled business. Brielle nodded to Grayson. He stepped forward, Summer still holding his hand. For a moment, he stood frozen, and Brielle could see the fear in his eyes. The memories of the last time he had stood before people like this. Then Summer squeezed his hand and whispered, You can do it. Daddy. Something shifted in Grayson's posture. He cleared his throat. 3 days ago, your company was facing infrastructure failures that threatened your product launch. Your engineers, despite their qualifications and resources, couldn't solve the problem. But the solution wasn't complex. It was just unconventional. He pulled out a tablet, displaying thermal maps and airflow diagrams. Your server ventilation was fighting against this building's HVAC system. By redirecting exhaust and adjusting fan speeds, we eliminated the heat buildup. The system is now operating at optimal efficiency. Ashton Walsh, sitting near Elijah, spoke up. The improvements could be coincidental. We can't know for certain that your recommendations were the cause. Grayson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Rianne stood. Actually, we can. I had our systems team document every change and measure the results. Mr. Foster's solution reduced operating temperature by 42% and eliminated all failure incidents. The data is conclusive. She passed folders around the table. Board members flipped through them, eyebrows rising. Elijah leaned back in his chair. Impressive work for someone who was fired for reckless engineering practices. The words landed like a bomb. Grayson's face went pale. Summer's grip on his hand tightened. That's a lie, Brielle said, her voice cutting through the room. And you know it, Elijah, because you're the one who created it. Careful, Elijah warned. No. Brielle stepped forward. I'm done being careful. 7 years ago, Grayson saved an entire manufacturing plant. I have the documentation right here. Testimony from workers whose lives he saved. Engineering reports, proving his solution was not only safe, but brilliant. She pulled out her own folder, distributing copies. He was destroyed not because he was reckless, but because he made people uncomfortable. Specifically, he made you uncomfortable, Elijah, when he solved a problem you couldn't. This is slander. It's truth. It's slander. 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 It's slander. Brielle's voice rang with conviction. You were on Titan's board. You signed off on the campaign to discredit him. And you're doing it again now, because he threatens your narrative that only people with the right pedigree deserve respect. The room erupted in murmurs. Elijah's face flushed red. This is preposterous. The board called this meeting to discuss your leadership failures, not to relitigate ancient history. Edith Walsh raised a hand, silencing the room. Actually, Elijah, this is quite relevant. If Miss Douglas brought in a consultant who solved our most critical problem, that speaks to her judgment, not against it. He's a nobody from a repair shop. He's the man who saved our product launch. Edith interrupted. And from what I'm reading here, he's the man you wronged 7 years ago. Elijah stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be accused, then leave, Brielle said coldly. But the vote stands. And I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in you, Elijah. 4. Conflict of interest, and for deliberately sabotaging this company's success to settle a personal grudge. The room went silent. Then, slowly, Edith nodded. I second that motion. One by one, other board members raised their hands in agreement. Elijah's face went white with fury. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Brielle's legs felt weak, but she remained standing. She looked at Grayson, who stood stunned, Summer still clutching his hand, and in that little girl's eyes, shining with pride and tears, Brielle saw the future she wanted to build. One where people like Grayson weren't thrown away. One where truth mattered more than status. The motion passes, Edith said quietly. Miss Douglas, you have our continued support. The weeks that followed transformed everything. Brielle didn't just keep her position, she used it to create change. The first thing she did was offer Grayson a formal position at Nexus Digital as Chief Innovation Consultant, a role that valued his unconventional thinking rather than punishing it. He was hesitant at first, worried about stepping back into the world that had hurt him. But Summer's enthusiasm and Brielle's promise that he could work on his own terms convinced him to try. The arrangement was unusual. Grayson kept his shop, worked 3 days a week at Nexus Digital, and brought Summer with him when school was out. The office had never seen anything like it. A consultant in work boots who solved complex problems while his daughter did homework in the corner. But it worked. More than worked. Grayson's fresh perspective revolutionized how the engineering team approached problems. He taught them to listen to systems, to trust their instincts, to value elegance over complexity. Within a month, Nexus Digital's product launch exceeded all projections. Within 2, other companies were calling, asking about the mysterious consultant who had turned things around. One afternoon, Brielle found Grayson in the workshop space she had built for him, a hybrid between his garage and a proper engineering lab. He was teaching a group of junior engineers his diagnostic techniques, showing them how to feel the rhythm of a system. Summer sat nearby, drawing pictures of circuit boards that looked like flowers. When she saw Brielle, she jumped up. "Miss Brielle, look what Daddy's teaching them." "I see that." Brielle smiled. "He's pretty good at it." "The best," Summer declared. After the session ended, and the engineers filed out with newfound confidence, Brielle lingered. Grayson wiped his hands on a rag, a gesture so familiar now it made her heart ache. "You're changing lives here," she said softly. "You know that, right?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I'm just teaching them to see differently." "That's everything." She stepped closer. "Grayson, I want to start a program. A fellowship for engineers from non-traditional backgrounds. People who learned in garages and community colleges instead of prestigious universities. People like you." His eyes widened. "Brielle, I'm serious. We'll call it the Foster Initiative. We'll recruit talent that the industry overlooks, give them real opportunities, prove that brilliance doesn't come with a pedigree." "You'd do that?" "I want to do that. With you." She held his gaze. "You changed my company, Grayson. But more than that, you changed me. You reminded me that success isn't about who you step on to climb higher. It's about who you lift up along the way." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "For 7 years, I thought I was done. Thought the best part of me was buried with my old career. But Summer, she never stopped believing I could fix things. And then you came along and proved she was right." Brielle's throat tightened. "She's always been right about you." Summer, who had been pretending not to listen, piped up from her corner. "I told you he could fix anything. Even broken companies." They both laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Grayson pulled Summer into a hug, kissing the top of her head. "What do you think, kiddo? Should we help Miss Brielle with her program?" Summer's face lit up. "Yes. And can I help too? I'm really good at drawing logos." "I wouldn't dream of doing it without you," Brielle said, her heart full. That evening, as Grayson drove them back to Brookside, Summer fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from excitement. Brielle rode with them, unwilling to return to her empty penthouse. "Thank you," Grayson said quietly, his eyes on the road. "For what?" "For seeing me. For fighting for me when everyone else had given up, including myself." "You did the same for my company," Brielle pointed out. "That was just engineering. What you did was different." He glanced at her. "You risked everything to prove I mattered. No one's ever done that before." Brielle reached over and squeezed his hand. "You matter, Grayson. You always have." They drove in comfortable silence, the city lights blurring past. And Brielle realized that somewhere between her car breaking down and this moment, she had found something more valuable than her empire, a family she hadn't known she needed. 6 months later, Nexus Digital hosted the inaugural Foster Initiative ceremony. The company's main atrium had been transformed, filled with people from every walk of life. Engineers in suits, mechanics in work clothes, students with grease-stained notebooks, community leaders who had championed the program. At the center of it all stood a banner designed by Summer, her childish handwriting declaring, "Broken things can be fixed. So can dreams." Brielle took the stage, her heart pounding with a different kind of nervousness than she'd felt in boardrooms. This wasn't about profit margins or market share. This was about people. 6 months ago, she began, my car broke down in a neighborhood I'd never noticed. I met a mechanic who fixed it with improvised tools and quiet confidence. That moment changed everything. Not because my car started running again, but because I started seeing differently. She gestured to Grayson, standing off to the side with Summer. Grayson Foster taught me that the most valuable solutions often come from unexpected places. That brilliance isn't measured by credentials, but by vision, persistence, and the courage to see what others miss. The crowd applauded. Grayson looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Summer beamed with pride. The Foster Initiative exists to find and nurture that brilliance. Brielle continued, "We're offering 20 full fellowships to engineers from non-traditional backgrounds. No degree required, just proven ability and passionate commitment. These fellows will work directly with our teams, bringing fresh perspectives that will make us better." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. But this program isn't just about Nexus Digital. It's about proving that the system that discards talented people because they don't fit a narrow mold is broken. And like any broken system, it can be fixed. The applause was thunderous. Brielle stepped down, and Grayson took her place at the podium, Summer beside him, holding his hand. "I'm not good at speeches," he said, his voice carrying through the space. "But I want to say this. For years, I believed my story was over. That one mistake, one powerful person's grudge, had defined me forever. But my daughter never stopped believing otherwise." He looked down at Summer. "She told everyone who would listen that I could fix anything. And when a CEO's car broke down outside my shop, she saw an opportunity, not for me to prove myself, but for two broken people to help each other." Summer waved at the crowd, grinning. "This program isn't about me," Grayson continued. "It's about everyone who's been told they're not enough, who's been overlooked, dismissed, thrown away. You are enough. Your perspective matters. And if you're willing to work hard and see problems differently, there's a place for you here." The room erupted in applause and cheers. People rushed forward, hands outstretched, stories spilling out about their own journeys, their own rejections, their renewed hope. Brielle stood to the side, watching Grayson and Summer surrounded by people whose lives they had changed, and felt something she hadn't experienced in her carefully controlled career. Pure joy. Later, after the crowds dispersed and the atrium quieted, the three of them sat on the steps outside, watching the sun set over the city. Summer sat between them, swinging her legs contentedly. "You did good, Daddy," she said. "We did good," he corrected, ruffling her hair. "This was your idea, remember? You're the one who dragged Miss Brielle into our lives." Summer giggled. "I knew you needed each other." Brielle raised an eyebrow. "Oh, did you?" "Yup." Summer nodded wisely. "Daddy needed someone who believed in him like I do. And you needed someone to remind you that important stuff isn't just about money." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Brielle thought. She looked at Grayson, finding him already watching her, with an expression that made her heart skip. "She's not wrong," he said softly. "No," Brielle agreed. "She's really not." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned purple and gold, three unlikely people who had found each other in the chaos of a breakdown and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Brielle's phone buzzed with a news alert. Nexus Digital stock reaches all-time high after launch of Revolutionary Fellowship program. She smiled and turned off the phone. For once, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was sitting right here. A man who had taught her that being broken wasn't the end. And a little girl who had always known that the best fixes come from the heart. "My dad can fix anything," Summer had said that day outside the coffee shop. She'd been right. But what Brielle had learned was that sometimes the things most in need of fixing aren't machines at all. Sometimes they're people, and dreams, and the courage to believe that second chances are real. And sometimes all it takes is one broken car, one unlikely meeting, and one little girl's unshakable faith to change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.